Well, I'd have to say that my main musical mentor was my father and also my mother. My parents were both professional musicians and educators. My father was a musicologist and a pianist, and my mother was a singer and a voice teacher. And from a very, very early age, they exposed me to great music. And it never dawned on me that anything else would would be important to me. And I like to say, it's a bit of an exaggeration, but my dad sort of taught me everything I know about music, not specifically conducting. And I didn't have any great mentors with whom I went to study and learn everything that this particular conductor had to offer. But I began observing and taking note of conductors from the very earliest time that I even thought about making music, which is to say, essentially as a child. And I've had the really fortunate opportunity to assist a number of outstanding conductors, particularly opera conductors, over the years. But I would say that the main thing about my learning to conduct is just keeping an open mind and observing everything and trial and error and sticking to your guns. Those are the kinds of things that are easier said than done. Well, I would say the single most important skill as an opera conductor and any kind of musician really is the role of preparation to your particular craft. Singers either have a voice or they don't have a voice, but preparing, that is, studying how, from a technical standpoint, from a role preparation standpoint, those things are obvious. As a conductor, the idea of preparation is all about gathering as much information as you possibly can. And in opera, that is where the most information is required to gather. There's obviously all of the orchestral considerations, all of the dramatic circumstances and considerations, as well as the vocal considerations. You have to spend the time to prepare so that you can be the right kind of collaborator. Conducting is about ultimately collaborating. It's not dictating. It's about collaborating with all of these other people who you try to encourage all of these other folks to do their preparation work, and then you combine, and you're sort of the arbitrator as opposed to the dictator about these various ideas. And if everyone does their role in preparation, then you'll have the best information. But as an opera conductor, you cannot be over-prepared. It's just not possible. Well, we talked about preparation, so I'll go on beyond that. The level of preparation that is expected is a sine qua non. But what I really try to achieve, and what I require, to the extent that I can, certainly encourage, from all of my fellow musicians, is a complete and total engagement, a commitment not only to the technical aspects, but to the dramatic aspects, to the value that goes beyond the written notes. That's why we're doing what we do anyway. It's about the expression. It's about the passion. It is about that which is the intangible quality of beauty. And without a complete and total dedication to that, we won't necessarily achieve all that we could otherwise have achieved. And so I just ask from my people to give their best effort and to do everything passionately. Not worry about mistakes. I always tell folks that a loud mistake is infinitely better than a soft mistake, because at least with a loud mistake you've committed something to it. So commitment and passion. That's what I want from my fellow musicians. A piece of advice for young conductors. It's interesting, people are always asking me how does one get into conducting? And there are as many different answers as there are conductors. What I would simply say is absorb as much as you possibly can about everything, even tangentially related to music, to opera, to art. Be a whole person to the extent that you can, and allow that to inform how you interpret music. It goes without saying that you need to have your own well thought out and well developed technique. There are people who say, oh, there's no such thing as conducting technique. Well, there might not be one conducting technique, but if you as a conductor don't have a technique, then you, despite what you might want to say that might be profound, if you don't have the most reliable and efficient way of communicating your profundity, then you're going to waste time and you're not going to get the results that you want. The two sides of the coin, the expressive side and the technical side, are just as important as the other, because the more you have to say, the more important it is that you streamline those elements that will allow you to communicate what you have to say the best. The other is absolutely the truth as well. Just if you have a technique, whether you're a pianist or a conductor or a singer, you might have a wonderful technique, but if you don't have something of depth to say, then what does that matter? Which is why I say focus on both aspects equally. And so that when you're making music, when you're standing in front of singers, when you're standing in front of an orchestra, you are engaging them in a way that is complete. Well, what's interesting is that the sort of the overreaching thing that I am working on or exploring is the phenomenon in music making of forward momentum and space. That is to say, how something can have a feeling of inevitability with a phrase, but at the same time without feeling rushed. I know this sounds like a technical thing, but I'm taking your question as a technical question. What am I focusing on? And that is something that I think is a challenge for all musicians. Forward momentum doesn't necessarily mean fast, and space doesn't necessarily mean slow. But I think that finding the balance between the two is something, particularly dealing with large ensembles, is something that interests me every time I'm conducting nearly anything, regardless of the repertoire. Well, I think that there are a number of really wonderful changes that have been happening. Most significantly, I would say in the last 20 years, is the recognition in the opera world, at companies large and small, that the theatrical element in producing operas on stage is extremely important. Particularly in an age where we are so visually stimulated with television and all of our devices, it is not particularly insightful to say that we live in an age where visual entertainment is as important, perhaps, as anything else. And when we go to an opera, we expect to have all of our senses challenged in the best kinds of ways. And I think that that has been happening. Also as important, and this is really more from the last, maybe not even 20, but in the last several years, there have been just a wonderful number of new works that have been entering into the repertoire, particularly here in America. And these works by wonderful composers offer an opportunity to reach out to a wider audience than perhaps the opera world has reached in the past, partly because the subject matters of these new operas are increasingly taking on relevant subjects, whether it's political or whether it's social. Those wonderful operas in and of themselves, that's fantastic, that's great, developing these new works. But just as important, I think, is the new emphasis that these new works are creating on reinterpreting or reconsidering some of the great masterpieces. It's difficult to look at a piece like Don Giovanni or The Marriage of Figaro or Tosca the same way that we did, say, 2 years ago, for a variety of reasons. Our world is changing, and for the better in many ways, in terms of how we are allowing voices that have heretofore not been given the same kind of consideration. We're allowing them to have a greater voice in the opera world, and that's magnificent. That's wonderful. I think in terms of opportunities in the business, that is to say, for more women conductors, there are wonderful women conductors. One of the questions you asked earlier is if you have a mentor, and I mentioned that I've had opportunities to assist a number of wonderful conductors. I've never had a more enjoyable time than I did being around Jane Glover. I would say what Jane Glover is as a conductor should be the model for every conductor. That is to say, not an ounce of artifice. Nothing but the music is important to her, and she does it with grace and with clarity and with dynamism. So there are wonderful, wonderful women conductors. There are all kinds of opportunities in our field for everybody. We just have to take advantage of those opportunities. And I think that companies now are starting to do that. I hope that it continues. I believe that it will. And it can only make the opera business, and indeed the art form, a better and more important art form for the world. Well, the financial challenges are obviously going to be there. I think that some of these changes that I've mentioned in the last question, if we can engage an audience and broaden the audience and broaden the audience to include younger people who are going to grow up and support the art form, then we'll have that will be our best chance. Not everything new, just merely for the sake of being new, is necessarily great. So we have to make certain that just because we're doing things that are new, we also have to be making sure that excellence in what we do, from a theatrical standpoint, from a musical standpoint, from a compositional standpoint, this is an art form that deserves the very, very best. We charge lots of money for tickets. We ask for lots of money from donors to help support this art form. And so for those of us who are in the creative end of it, whether it's reinterpreting, whether it's composing, whether it's putting something on stage, we have to continue to demand of ourselves uncompromised excellence, uncompromised commitment to artistic quality, and to that same kind of passion that I was talking about earlier. We recognize, those of us who are blessed to be in this business, we recognize what a privilege it is to be working musicians, working artists. And the privilege is we have something that we know can change people's lives. We know this, we've seen it in our own lives, we've seen it in many, many people. So we have to hold fast to that knowledge and never waver in our commitment to bring excellence to our public. And if we continue that, I think that the opera world will continue to thrive and reach new heights.
Io